Now in this video we will learn about production possibilities curve or frontier. Some books call it frontier, some books call it curve, um, both referring to a single concept which is uh, used in explaining some very interesting topics in economics, which we will be using in the next lecture, lecture 2. So it's important that we understand now the basic concept of, very simple I should say, concept of production possibilities curve. Now let's go back to our island economy that we used in the explanation of GDP video, in our GDP video. So let's say this is island, that the same island we had, and there are two families, family A and my family B here somewhere. They just relocated, and as usual they produce say they produce fish products, fish, and they also produce agricultural products. Let's call them tomatoes. Let's see, it could be anything else. Tomatoes. Now they have the following resources. Let's assume that they have some labor. Labor, labor is basically human power or people, let's say. So adults and children, assuming in the island economy there is no child labor restrictions like we have now. Everyone works basically. Well, you can assume yourself being there, no one else apart from your family. Most likely that your child will be fishing while you are engaged in something else, right? So let's assume that that works. Usually in economics, if you don't assume that is not realistic, whatever that's not realistic, the concepts do not work. Some theories do not work. So we have to impose a lot of assumptions on the theory or on when we explain complex topics. We will see them. And the first one it will be next week when we come to Ricardo's model. Okay, so one of the factors of production is labor. Next is capital. Well, what is capital? Capital is all the equipment that we usually use. Today we associate capital with our equipment, but it could be anything that's used in the process of production, as long as it's not labor. Labor is not capital. So you can think of fish catching nets, all the kits for catching fish, and for agricultural purposes, producing tomatoes, you will need, I think, spade. You will need other agricultural tools. So that's capital. Your houses are usually capital, but because they are developing infrastructure and developing construction buildings, we don't usually include them for the purpose of commercial. In this case, we could commercial activities. In this case, we should be able to include them because this is an island economy. Other than two houses, we don't have anything else for two families. So capital is in there, say. Maybe we use them for storing tomatoes because tomatoes cannot be stored outside, say. And we also use some sort of technology. Assume this is all our knowledge of types of fish, types of tomatoes, how they grow, how we can use our labor and capital in an efficient way is basically the technology. It could be entrepreneurship as well. If you are studying entrepreneurship, you will see that it is part of production. Is actually factor of production. Okay, so these three factors are used, and notice that they are limited. You have so much labor. Basically, there are only a few working people, population. Capital is also limited. Once it's broken, you have to replace it, and it's hard to replace. So opportunity cost of it is very high. And technology, well, it is not scarce. We don't know everything in the universe, so we can expect it to be kind of limited as well. We have limited knowledge of tomatoes, fish, because in another island, in a neighboring island, they may know better types of tomato or different ways of growing tomato, for example. But then we are constrained by this border, so we can't really swim there because we don't have both. Assume that all of them are scarce. Now, what can we produce in a given year then? We can show what we could produce more efficiently by using production possibilities curve. And here it is. So if we just draw a graph that is usually used in economics when we explain production possibilities curve. So I'll draw it as big as possible, and oops, all right, it worked well. Now let's assume that given our resources, oops, given our resources, we can only produce tomatoes, or let's say we don't produce anything else but tomatoes and fish products. So in the economy, we don't produce anything, given our constraints and resource limitations. In that case, if we use all our manpower, capital, and all our know-how technology in producing fish, then let's say we produce, say, 500 tons of fish, something like that. And if we say deploy all our manpower and labor and capital into producing tomatoes, growing tomatoes, what we get is, let's say, 400 tons of tomatoes in a year. Yeah, because if we use everything else for tomatoes, there's zero production of fish. We don't catch any fish. But if we produce fish only, then we have zero tomatoes to eat. But now, what if we produce a bit of tomato and more fish? In that case, say we are somewhere here. So where is my pointer? It's lost. I can't see it properly. So let's say we produce a little bit of tomato here. Say this is 75 tons. Then obviously it consumes a bit of our resources, labor and capital. This has to be dedicated. In other words, all of the labor is not now in fish catching. Part of it is here, and most of it is in fish catching, for example. And capital as well. Some of the nets that we could use for tomatoes is now in catching the fish. Oh, the nets that we use for catching fish is now used in tomato production, for example, tomato growing. Maybe there is a use for it. Technology as well, because we're losing people going there to produce tomatoes. Then obviously they are leaving. I mean, they are taking knowledge with themselves, which could be used in catching the fish. Say, in that case, we are able to produce only, if let's say assuming that we can be producing 75 tons of tomatoes, then obviously we're losing some of the resources, deploying some of the resources from fish to tomatoes. So we are now reducing the production of our fish. Then it's 425. So this will be a dot somewhere here. Yeah. Oops. Wow. This is not accurate, but you can see that this is where the production point is. So basically the maximum amount that we can produce both of them would be this point, at this point here. Yeah, using our resources. So this would be 425 tons of fish and 75 tomatoes. And if we continue producing, increasing the production of tomatoes, say this is now 125 or something like that, then obviously we are deploying more of resources that we previously used in fish catching now to tomatoes, right? So then fish production will have to decline because some of the people are now shifting to tomato production. So that will, let's say, 375. So now the production point, maximum production that we achieve is 125 of tomatoes, 375 of fish. Then this will be the point here. And then in that fashion, we keep moving from fish to tomato production. Say this is another point now where we produce more tomatoes and less of that, and so on and so forth. It goes on. And yeah, if you now connect this, oh, didn't work, so we'll have to try again. So draw it. 1 second. So right, this is our production possibilities. Well, in this case, a line, not a curve. Or, in other words, this is a frontier. We can't really produce at this point. We can't really produce this much tomato and at the same time this much fish, that's because of resource limitations. We can't really use our resources to achieve this too, because this, this requires a lot of, for example, technology. Maybe if we had a technological shock, we could move the frontier to that point, and this would be within the point, within the line. I mean, within the area where we can produce. This point, for example, can be produced. At this point, we can produce that much and this much of tomatoes. That's possible. Anything under the line here is possible, but anything beyond this line, offline here, in this case, in this area, is not possible because of the limits that we face. So these points are possible only when we have more labor or more capital. So if the population increases, then there will be more workforce. They can produce more, catch more fish. That means this line here will move somewhere here, for example. Then we could expect this sort of movement, right? Because so outward movement, for example, more labor can produce more tomatoes, more of fish as well, so on and so forth. If, for example, there's a natural disaster and part of our capital is destroyed, for example, then we might expect the line to go down here. So these points will now not be available for us. We can't produce anything on this line now because of capital loss and maybe possibly human loss as well. So labor will be lost as well, right? So this is the concept of production possibilities frontier. Basically, frontier is in the sense that it's the maximum amount. It's the front. Beyond it is difficult to move. Yeah. So, and in this case, for example, where is my cursor? I keep losing it. Yeah. So this here is the maximum that we can produce this at this point is tomatoes and fish. That is a frontier, a line here. That's why it's called frontier. And it's also called curve because of the concept of opportunity cost. And it's usually described as a concave curve like this here, where we have our tomatoes, tom, and fish. Now all the points on this curve are attainable. They are the maximum amounts that we produce of the combination of fish and tomatoes. And inside also all of these points are attainable. These points are actually combinations of fish and tomatoes, basically. Yeah, these are the maximum combinations given our resources. In this case, because these points are inside the line here, inside the curve, they are not maximum amounts. They are actually uh, produced inefficiently. We have more capability, so we can produce on this point, on this curve, anywhere here. All of these points on the line, like in this case, in the straight line case, are most efficiently produced goods combinations. Basically, any point here is the combination, optimum combination of fish and tomatoes that, given our resources, we can produce. And this curve also can be bulged out like this if we have more labor, more capital, or better technology. Also, this curve goes down as well. It can shrink as well anywhere below here, given the natural disaster, famine, for example, that happened during the 19th century and 18th, in the historical period, modern historical periods, for example, even today, in epidemics, for example, um, kill people basically. In Africa, for example, we had Zika virus in Brazil that basically, as a result of Zika virus, people, you know, babies are born without proper functioning brain. Or there was also another uh, infectious disease that was spreading in Africa about 2 years ago. Even a Scottish lady caught it. Well, was infected as well. She was a nurse trying to cure the people there, help the people who were infected with this virus, which I don't remember now in Africa, in some countries in Western Africa. And she was infected as well. As a result, I think she's dead now. I don't remember exactly, but basically she's out of labor force. Basically, we are, because of this, losing labor force. So one nurse out of work, basically, because of that. So you can assume that these things will really reduce the production. So UK's potential for having a better healthcare, for example, is affected as well by losing one nurse, because then they have to bring it from outside, or have better training or train new people. That is costly. So the same here. New people need to learn catching new fish, better fish, and things like this. Okay, okay. I got distracted. I got distracted here quickly. Sorry. I will now make another video. It's already 15 minutes something. So I'll make another short video about why production possibilities curve is a curve usually that we have here, and we in fact use this shape of the curve, not the straight line, to explain a few things in the next lecture, and this will be about opportunity cost. Okay, see you in the next video now.